Have you ever told someone about a dream and suddenly felt less motivated to pursue it? Maybe you were excited about starting a business, learning a skill, writing a book, or changing your life. You shared the idea, people smiled, and for a moment you felt as if you had already taken the step, but nothing had changed. This happened to a man named Daniel. Daniel wanted to become a writer. He had talent, imagination, and a story he believed could matter to people. He imagined himself holding his book, seeing his name on the cover and hearing readers talk about his work. The dream still felt completely real, vivid, and close. Whenever Daniel met his friends, he told them about the book. He told his family too. Even coworkers heard about his novel. "You're going to be successful," they told him. "Your book will be amazing. You should definitely do it." Daniel loved hearing those words. Their excitement made him feel proud. He began seeing himself differently, not as someone who wanted to write, but as someone who was becoming a writer. And that was where something quietly changed. The more Daniel talked about his dream, the more satisfied he felt without doing the work. The praise gave him a taste of the success he wanted before he had earned it. Soon, the urgency to sit down and write began disappearing. What if the applause Daniel received for his dream was quietly stealing the energy he needed to achieve it? Daniel's days began to follow a pattern he barely noticed. He would wake up thinking about the book, imagine how successful it could become, and spend a few minutes planning what he would write. Then his phone would light up. He would check one message, watch one video, and suddenly an hour had disappeared. He told himself he was still working toward the dream. After all, he was researching publishing companies, reading about successful writers, choosing possible titles, and imagining the cover. Sometimes he even bought a new notebook because it made him feel prepared, but the pages remained almost empty. When people asked about his future, Daniel always had an impressive answer. He would describe the career he wanted, the life he planned to build, and the person he hoped to become. He spoke with confidence. Others could see the picture in his mind, and their admiration made him feel closer to it. That feeling was powerful. After every conversation, Daniel felt strangely satisfied. He had not written a chapter, but he had talked about writing one. He had not built a career, but he had described the career he wanted. He had not changed his life, but he had explained exactly how he would change it. Slowly, Daniel began confusing an imagined identity with a real one. He liked being seen as a future writer. He liked people believing in his talent. But becoming a writer required something very different. Sitting alone when nobody was watching, writing badly, deleting pages, starting again, and continuing even when the excitement disappeared. Talking gave him immediate emotional reward. Working gave him discomfort first and satisfaction later. That difference mattered more than Daniel realized. The person he imagined becoming was confident, disciplined, and productive. The person sitting at his desk was often distracted, uncertain, and afraid that his writing would not be good enough. Between those two identities was a quiet battle. Every day he could either protect the fantasy or face the work required to make it real. For months, Daniel protected the fantasy. Then one evening, surrounded by friends, he made his biggest announcement yet. He raised his glass and proudly declared that his book would be finished before the end of the year. Everyone applauded. Daniel smiled. For a moment, he felt successful. But this time, the applause would not let him escape so easily from the truth. Daniel kept thinking about the announcement he had made, 3 months. He had said it confidently in front of everyone, and now the words followed him home. His friends were excited. They asked about the book, imagined its success, and reminded him that they were waiting to read it. For the first few days, their excitement gave Daniel energy. He woke early, opened his laptop, and stared at the blank page. He typed a sentence, deleted it, wrote another, and then stopped. The story in his imagination had been beautiful. On the page, it looked ordinary. That was the first uncomfortable discovery. Dreams are easy to love when they exist only in your mind. They become harder when you have to build them. Daniel had imagined becoming a writer, but he had never imagined the patience required to write when nothing felt inspiring. He had imagined readers praising his book, but not the rejection, repetition, awkward first drafts, and lonely hours when nobody cared what he was creating. So he began avoiding the work. He researched writing techniques instead of writing. He watched interviews with successful authors instead of finishing a paragraph. He reorganized his notes, changed the title, and planned a new opening. He was always preparing to begin, but somehow never beginning. One evening, Daniel walked into a small bookstore near his home. Behind the counter stood Mr. Elias, the older owner who had heard Daniel speak about his book many times. Elias looked at him quietly. Then he asked, "How many pages have you written?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no answer came. The silence felt heavier than any criticism. Elias did not laugh. He did not lecture him. He simply nodded as if Daniel had finally discovered something important. The problem was not that Daniel lacked a dream. He had one. The problem was that his words had created the feeling that the dream was already moving. Elias closed the bookstore for the evening and said, "Come tomorrow morning. There is something I want you to see." Daniel agreed. He walked home wondering what an old bookstore owner could possibly teach him about his unfinished book. He didn't know it yet, but the answer would change the way he understood dreams, silence, and the work required to make an idea real. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the bookstore before the doors opened. Mr. Elias was already there, standing beside a small wooden table with an old lantern resting on it. "You asked me to come," Daniel said. "I did," Elias replied, "but today I won't tell you what to do. I will tell you a story." He began with a traveler who carried a tiny flame through a dangerous valley. The traveler believed the flame would lead him to a distant mountain where he hoped to begin a new life. At first, he protected it carefully. Then, as he walked, excitement filled his heart. He wanted people to know what he was carrying. Whenever he met someone, he stopped and lifted the flame proudly. "Look at this fire," he would say. "I'm going to carry it all the way to the mountain." People gathered around him. They admired his courage. They praised his determination. Their words made him feel important, and soon he began enjoying the attention almost as much as the journey. But every time he stopped, the wind around him became stronger. The little flame trembled. He covered it with his hands, then uncovered it again to show people. One evening, a powerful wind swept through the valley. The flame disappeared. The traveler stood in darkness, holding an empty lamp. Elias paused. Then he continued. There was another traveler carrying a similar flame. She had the same mountain ahead of her, but she behaved differently. She placed her flame inside a small lantern and protected it from the wind. Nobody saw it, Elias said. Nobody praised her. Nobody knew how difficult her journey was. She simply kept walking. Sometimes the flame became weak. Sometimes she had to stop and protect it, but she never opened the lantern just to receive applause. Step by step, she continued toward the mountain. When she finally arrived, she opened the lantern. The flame was still alive. Daniel remained silent. Elias looked at him and said, "A dream can be like that flame. In the beginning, it is fragile. It needs your attention, your energy, your discipline, and your protection. Talking about a dream is not always wrong," he continued. "Sometimes we need advice, support, or help, but when talking becomes a substitute for doing, something changes. You begin spending the energy that should have been used to build the dream." Daniel felt a familiar discomfort rising inside him. He suddenly saw his own behavior clearly. He had been carrying his flame through the marketplace, asking everyone to admire it, while the wind of attention slowly weakened it. For months, he had been showing people what he planned to become. He had rarely protected the quiet work required to become it. And for the first time, Daniel understood why silence had never been the enemy of his dream. Perhaps silence had been the shelter it needed. The question was no longer who believed in him, but whether he would protect it himself. Daniel did not announce his next decision to anyone. The following morning he woke early, made coffee, and sat at his desk before the world became noisy. He opened the same document that had frightened him for weeks and wrote a small number of words. They were not brilliant. Some were awkward. A few sentences sounded terrible, but he kept going. The next day he returned. Then again. He studied writing, but he stopped using study as a hiding place. When he found a weak section, he worked on it. When a paragraph failed, he rewrote it. When he had a difficult day and wrote almost nothing, he did not call himself a failure. He simply began again the next morning. Nobody knew. His friends still asked about his book sometimes, but Daniel gave simple answers. He no longer needed to describe every chapter, every idea, or every milestone. There was something uncomfortable about keeping his progress private. He missed hearing, "That's amazing." He missed watching people's faces light up when he spoke about his future. For a while, silence felt like losing something. Then he discovered that silence was giving him something far more valuable. Proof. Every finished page became evidence that he was changing. Every difficult paragraph he completed became evidence that he could keep going. Every morning he showed up became another small promise kept. Daniel no longer needed people to believe he was becoming a writer. He was beginning to believe it himself because his actions were giving him reasons to. The pages slowly accumulated. 10 became 20. 20 became 50. His writing improved not because he suddenly became more talented, but because repetition had made him better. His confidence changed too. It became quieter. It no longer needed applause. This is the difference between borrowed confidence and earned confidence. Borrowed confidence comes from what people say about you. Earned confidence comes from what you repeatedly prove to yourself. So ask yourself honestly, what would happen if you stopped explaining your next move and spent that energy making the next move? You might discover that the life you keep talking about does not need more announcements. It needs your attention, your patience, and your next small action. Sometimes the strongest evidence of who you are becoming is simply the work nobody else knows you are doing. Quietly, consistently, patiently, especially when nobody is watching or applauding. Months later, Daniel reached the final page. He stared at the screen for a long, quiet moment. There was no applause, no celebration, and no crowd waiting to congratulate him. There was only silence, and the quiet knowledge that he had finished something he once believed might never exist. He remembered the days when writing felt impossible. He remembered the paragraphs he deleted, the mornings he wanted to quit, and the nights when doubt convinced him that he was wasting his time. Nobody had seen those moments. Nobody had known how often he had almost stopped. And that was what made the achievement feel different. When Daniel had first announced his book, he had felt successful before doing the work. Now, after months of quiet effort, he felt something deeper. He didn't feel important. He felt capable. He finally understood the difference between being praised for an intention and being respected for an accomplishment. Words could make people believe in him, but only actions could make him believe in himself. The book itself did not transform him into an extraordinary person. The discipline required to finish it did. The old Daniel had talked about becoming a writer. The new Daniel had quietly become one. He no longer needed everyone to know what he was building. He no longer needed applause to prove that his effort mattered. His confidence came from private evidence. The pages he had written, the problems he had solved, and the promises he had kept. Perhaps that is what real growth looks like. Not becoming someone the world suddenly notices, but becoming someone you can finally trust when nobody is watching. Daniel closed the document and smiled. His story was not finished, but for the first time he knew he could continue. And that was enough for him. Now the story turns to you. What dream have you been talking about more than working on? Are you sharing your plans because you genuinely need support, or because hearing people praise your future gives you the feeling that you have already succeeded? What could change if you stopped explaining your next move and used that energy to make it? And ask yourself one more question. Which part of your dream is still too fragile to expose? Silence does not mean becoming secretive. It does not mean refusing help, advice, or encouragement. Some dreams need trusted people beside them. The lesson is simpler. Protect the early stages of meaningful work from unnecessary validation, distraction, comparison, and the satisfaction of being praised before you have finished. Choose one goal. For the next few weeks, work on it quietly. Let your progress become your motivation. Let your discipline become your confidence. You do not need everyone to understand what you are building while you are still building it. And if you are learning English, remember the same principle. You do not have to become fluent overnight. Read a little, listen a little, speak, make mistakes, and practice again. Keep improving even when nobody notices. One day, the progress you quietly built will speak for you. You don't have to announce the person you're becoming. Become that person and let your life introduce you. Keep going quietly and let your finished work become the announcement you once thought you needed to make to everyone.